Hello world, and welcome to this edition of Tech on Fire with Blaze. I'm Blaze Stewart, architect at Emissera, and today we're going to be taking a look at IoT Edge Modules. Hi guys, today I want to talk again about Azure IoT Edge, and today we're going to be looking at it from the module landscape. Basically, we want to see kind of all the pieces that go into making an Azure IoT Edge work. We're not going to get into the code of how to write one of these. We'll probably do that in a separate video because this is a fairly detailed discussion on everything that goes into the Edge, because there's a lot of moving parts here and a lot of things that are fairly nuanced, so it's going to take a while to kind of unpack this. So I figured I'd do it over 2 videos instead of 1. But this is the IoT Edge that I've currently deployed, and this one I have running on an Ubuntu VM. You can deploy this to Windows as well, or to some other Linux distro, but the basic context for this is a workspace that allows you to deploy modules to an IoT Edge device, and that IoT Edge device basically acts like a microcosm of an IoT hub, wherein you can do messaging and correlation of messages and filtering of messages and different things like that. So when we deploy an Edge device, it connects back up to Azure IoT Hub by way of a connection string, and we've looked at how to deploy that and how to get that up and running. But once we have that up and running, we have this idea of modules right here. So every module that we have running on this, it shows up in this list right here. So there are 2 modules that are a part of every IoT Edge deployment, and that is the agent and the hub. These do different things, and when you look at your deployment, you're going to be able to see these modules running in that context as Docker containers, because that's really what they're designed to be run as. And any module that we deploy is also going to be a Docker container as well. So what we're going to be basically doing is creating a Docker container with our code, and then we're going to be creating a manifest that will deploy that Docker container to the IoT Edge, whatever that might be. And to do that, what we need is a couple of things. We need an IoT hub, we need the IoT Edge deployed, and we need the Docker runtime deployed to the IoT Edge, and we also need a container registry. So those are kind of all the working parts of this particular ecosystem that we're going to be talking about here. Now, if I go down into any one of these, I can look at these modules. These are the system modules, and this is a custom module right here. If I drill down into this one, I can see various properties about this particular module, and it's going to tell me about the image URI. That's basically the Docker image and where it's pulling it from. This is getting it from the Microsoft Container Registry. That's universal container registry that has all the official Microsoft images on it. And it tells me what kind of container it is, and it tells me, the current status of this. And if I want to get messages from this or look at the logs, and come over here to troubleshoot, and this is going to show me basically the outputs of the Docker logs as it's currently running in the current context of the IoT Edge. And this particular agent right here, the Edge agent, is responsible for the orchestration of the IoT modules that get deployed to the Edge. And this is the one that comes up first, and it's the one that's probably going to be the one that you're going to be able to get a lot of diagnostic information from if there's trouble whenever you're trying to figure out, why isn't my module deploying on a given hub or a given Edge instance. So that's this one right here. The hub itself is the message broker. So this is basically the microcosm of the IoT hub from the messaging side of things. And so what this allows us to do is create a place on my Edge where messages can be sent and then processed and then forwarded onto the actual IoT hub instance that this Edge is associated with. When we talked about this, we did talk about this through the lens of the different kinds of gateways that are available. We can have a transparent gateway, and we can also have a translation gateway, and either one will work kind of in a similar fashion, but it allows us to have extensibility in our platform. And the module devices, though, are going to be part of this translation gateway or part of that transparent gateway depending on how I use the module. And this is the message broker that's going to kind of glue all those messages together, whether it be a module that's emitting a message or filtering a message, or you have something like a device that is sending a message and you want to filter that message, however you're going to be handling that. So this is the one that basically is just the messaging hub for your IoT Edge device. So those are your two system modules. Now, anything else is going to either be a marketplace module or a custom module. Now, the marketplace modules are the ones that are commercially available, and there's several of them that we can look at. If you wanted to deploy one of these modules, you can easily add them using the Azure IoT Edge. If I want to add it, I go into my device right here, and if I want to set modules, I can add a module into this and click add right here. I can add a marketplace module. We're going to look at stream analytics at another time, but if I wanted to look at a marketplace module, one of the ones that is commonly used from Microsoft is SQL. So if I wanted to essentially add a SQL database to this, like this right here, I could add in this SQL server module right here, and that one will allow me to have that up and running as a SQL instance right there. So if I want to add another one of these, if I just type in SQL, there was a couple options here. There's the SQLite, which is a SQLite database with some endpoints for it, and I also have Azure SQL Edge for developers, Azure SQL Edge, which are Edge type SQL databases. This one's just a IoT module to simulate temperatures, and that kind of thing. But in any case, you have these different options here, and if you don't filter it, you can see where these are and kind of what you have available. You can just pick one, whatever it might be. But a common one might be IoT blob storage on IoT Edge. If you wanted to have a blob storage endpoint that's more local rather than using the cloud-based storage, this one might be blob API available to you on your Edge appliance or something like that. Our main interest for this particular demo and the one that we're going to be doing in our next video is on custom modules, though, because custom modules is what we're going to be using for filtering as well as providing extensibility for translation and things like that inside the context of an IoT Edge device. And I currently have one running right here, but I'm going to go look at this one in code. So I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of constructing this and setting up routes and a lot of other things. I'm basically just going to look at it from the lens of setting this up through the manifest files, building a container, pushing the container, and then deploying this using the manifest, and we'll be able to see it on our IoT Edge device once we deploy it. So I'm looking at a project that I have done already in Azure IoT Edge, and today we're just going to be looking at a couple of the files in this particular project to talk about the workflow for deploying this. So the main thing that I want to look at here is the Docker image and the Docker file right here, these template files, and then ultimately what the output of that is. So as I mentioned, this is all based on Docker containers. So the Docker workflow is to build a container image and then deploy that container image as a container to some kind of environment, which in our case is IoT Edge. So to do that, I've created a project that, and the scaffolding of this is going to give me a stub for an application, and it's going to generate these deployment templates right here, and it's going to generate this Docker file. Now, everything else about this is going to be more specific to Node.js, but these kinds of things, Docker files, and these deployment manifests right here, these templates, are going to be universal to any kind of IoT Edge module that I'm going to be writing. And so I'm mostly going to be looking at these today. Next time, we're going to be looking at getting into the weeds and talking about building routes and then getting one of these things up and running to do a lot of that cool stuff that you can do with modules. So this particular one is the IoT Edge module deployment right here, and I'm looking at the template file. Now, the first thing that I need to look at is the Docker file, though. The Docker file is pretty straightforward. These are generated files. You probably don't need to touch these unless there's some customizations that you need to do this, but this looks like 99% of all Node.js Docker files. Basically, the version of the Docker, you upload a package JSON, you install some dependencies, and then your app is ready to go. Very easy to do with Docker and Node.js. The deployment down here, though, is where things get a little bit tricky. So this particular template is the one that is going to generate for you whenever you create the scaffolding. Now, I've gone through this, and I've kind of cleaned it up and made it more specific to my application here. Now, one thing that you're not going to see a lot in the documentation is sometimes you need to put in credentials, especially if you're using a custom registry or a private registry. So up here in the side of this agent manifest, you're going to see the module content, and then under that, you're going to see agent, edge agent right here. And this is going to have, this is basically the twinning properties that you're going to have for this. Then that's why you see property desired, very similar to what you would see in a IoT device twinning property. And part of that is registry credentials. And this registry credentials right here is what I need to supply to the agent so it knows where to log into to pull the image from. If you don't supply this, this might get an error if you're using a private registry. So this one I'm pulling from an Azure Container Registry. And so I've put in the address for that, the username and password. Now, once I've got that set, now everything else in this thing is pretty much as it is. There's really very little in this I have to configure around the hub. This is just basically talking about the exposed ports for things like MQTT and HTTP messaging that it supports. Remember, that's that messaging broker that we talked about. This is right here is where the good stuff is. This is my module that I've defined. This is my custom module that I've defined. And this is where I basically need to set up anything that's related to the start properties on this. As a best practice though, if you can avoid having anything on the create options here for the manifest, that means you're probably going to get less issues when you go to deploy this. We're going to get more into how to configure your modules and do all that in our next video when we actually get in the weeds of on wiring one of these up with routes and all that kind of stuff. But today we're just kind of talking through these manifests and the workflow. But this is where I populate that. And this right here is where the image reference comes in. And this is basically going to be substituted in using this string right here, modules.myModule. And that is a reference to the image. So this is what it's going to use to create this config file right here after I've done the Docker image build and the Docker image push up to my container registry. So I can actually delete this file right here. And I'm about to show you that. I'm going to build this file. And it's actually going to produce that config file when I build this. So the build process for this is pretty straightforward. You just build the IoT solution. What that's going to do is call a Docker build, and it's going to push that up to a container registry if I choose this one right here. This just does a build, but this one will do the push as well. And this is going to happen really fast because I've already done this. But if you were to do this without having done it already, then this could take a while, depending on which platform you're using. I'm using Node.js, which is a fairly small image. But in any case, this one, when I first pushed it, it took about 2 minutes, start to finish, to push all the layers and get that up into my image registry. But once the first one's done, each subsequent build will happen rather quickly. Now, if you haven't done this already and you need to do something with a login, and this is basically to prime your Docker environment that is running on your particular environment to install and connect to your Docker registry. In this case, you can use Docker login and then put in the name of your container registry, and that should match whatever is right here. And that's so this is telling the IoT Edge what credentials to use to pull the image. You need to put in the same credentials to push the image as well. And because this is using a password that I've already entered, this. I'm going to paste in the password, and that's going to log in to that registry. If you haven't done that, you need to do that before you actually build the image as well. So once you've created the registry, everything is up and running and everything is connected. This way, you can push the image. It will push it fine without any issues, and you should have a image up on your container registry. So to validate that, I'm going to come back over here to my IoT, my container registry, and I look at my repositories, and this is the current one that I have right here. And this is the one I just built. And that's the one that literally just built this one and pushed it. So that's my latest I've got running as far as the build process goes. Now to deploy this, I can deploy it using the Visual Studio Code, or I can do it through the Azure CLI, or I can use the PowerShell. How you deploy this is really not the issue. It's mostly about having this deployment file that allows you to deploy it to whatever you're going to be using for running this, which in this case is IoT Edge. So the IoT Edge is pretty straightforward for running these. Once you have the template all squared away, you have your credentials in there, and you've kind of got this stubbed out for your modules. The next thing to do is either to build it and generate this file right here, or you can simply, if you want to just change the manifest, you can right click on this right here. Let's see, delete this right here. Yes, move to recycle bin. Oops, I need to do this one. And you can right click on this right here and generate an IoT deployment manifest. And that's just going to generate the exact same file. This one right here is a template, and this is the output from it. So this is the config. So you generally want to edit this and then just regenerate the config file right here and just use that. So this has got the credentials in it. This has also got the container image name that's right here. And so that's the container image name that was substituted in and everything else. So we're going to build on this a little bit more next week whenever we start looking at how to parameterize these templates, as well as customized routes and things like that. But in any case, just knowing how to get this deployment file right here and then deploying that's a big part of the workflow. So once we have that done, I can actually deploy this. Now to do this, I'm going to use Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to use the Azure IoT Hub module for this, the extension. So to deploy this, it's pretty straightforward. I have an IoT Edge already deployed. You come down here and create deployment from a single device, and you come down here, and then you come over here to config, and you select that particular module. But to show you that nothing's running currently right now, I'm going to come back over here to my IoT Hub and look at my IoT Edge that I've since cleaned up. And I currently don't have any modules other than the two default modules. Actually, I do have one running. Okay, let me clean this up right here. I can delete this guy if I want to. And so this one is the one that's currently running. So I'm going to remove this guy. So to do that, I come over here to set modules, and I can just come down here to click that button and save it and create. And that's going to actually delete that module from my IoT Edge. And I won't currently have that running. It takes a minute for it to push that down to the edge from doing it in the Azure portal. If I come back down over here, I should be able to refresh this, and I only see my two modules, my default modules. Sometimes it can take a minute to see that happen. Okay, so now that's gone. So now when I deploy my manifest again, it should recreate that module. And to show you kind of what it's doing on the Edge device itself, I come back over here, and I do a Docker PS. I currently only have the two containers running that represent my Edge and my agent. And so I basically just need to redeploy my Edge and my agent and update these two. And then what that will do is it will then deploy the new module to this particular IoT Edge hub right here with the routes and then the module itself running in a Docker container. So to do that, I'm going to use code. So I'm going to choose this manifest file right here, and it's going to automate that. And so I should see deployment succeeded right here. So let's come back over here to Edge inside the Azure portal, and I should see my module. I've got an error. Sometimes it's going to be in an error state until it actually comes up and runs. Now it's running, and so I can see that it is running. I can come back over here and look at the twinning data. It's just the same stuff that we saw in the various versions that we've seen already. I don't have any parameters on this, so this is just the basic properties that you see. We're going to put some properties on this whenever we look at it in a future video, but in any case, we can use that to configure our modules as well, and that's what's going to end up in the manifest. But for now, let's look at it from this angle. So that's my module twin, and though I know everything looks good, it's reported in a running status right here. And if I just see the Azure IoT Hub client initialized, that's actually the Docker log that is reporting. And so that's the actual output that we would see if we actually ran Docker logs on this module in the Azure IoT Hub instance, that is Hub or Edge instance really, that we're running down here. So let's go ahead and do that. If I do a Docker PS now, I should see that my module is running as a container. If I do a Docker logs and then on that module, it's going to show me that the Docker logs is there. If I look at my agent, I should be able to see Docker. I should be able to see output from where it pushed that newest image right here. That looks like it schema processed. Looks like it got some stuff from my module prepare module and it deployed it. If you had errors deploying it, this is where they would show up. And I don't think I have anything on Hub yet because the Hub is currently not receiving anything other than just some created cloud connection for my module right here. And so there's some routes that I'm going to be using and processing through all this. But in any case, that's the deployed result of a custom module. So what we did is we built it using the Docker file, pushed it to a container registry, then we updated the manifest file, and we deployed the manifest file to IoT Hub. It pushed it down to the edge, and then the edge pulled the image and then started it as a Docker container. So a lot going on there, but a lot of moving parts. But you see the basic workflow follows a standard Docker workflow. So this would be how we would use this if we're going to be deploying modules to an IoT edge. Next time, we're going to look at this in more depth as we look at how to build routes and the code that's kind of behind it, and kind of look at how all that works so that we can create the gateways and the filters and do all that kind of cool stuff with modules.
If you like this content, please consider visiting us online at www.wintellect.com, and there you can find about services that Wintellect offers, including training and consulting services. Also, please consider subscribing to this channel by clicking on the subscribe button and clicking the bell icon to get notifications when new content becomes available, and also comment down below. You can also follow me on Twitter at @TheOneMule, and also follow Wintellect on Twitter at WintellectNow or at Wintellect. We are constantly posting things about Azure-related technologies and things related to software development. You can also reach us by email at consulting@wintellect.com. Until next time, thank you.